I'm going to do a series of tutorials on options, and there's a bit of calculation involved in the pricing of options. In the first one, what I'm going to do is I'll just go over some of the concepts of it and some of the key terms. Now, options are basically derivatives. Okay, so people, when they hear about a derivative, generally tend to think that this is something that's going to be risky. Okay, but not necessarily. A derivative is really any asset that derives its value from another asset. Okay, so you're deriving your value from another asset, and that in itself doesn't make it risky. The risk comes when you have leverage, and often derivatives will have leverage. Okay, and leverage is the financial term for debt. Basically, what you're doing is you are borrowing money to make that investment. So, if I tell you I'm going to buy shares in a company, there's a certain element of risk. If I tell you I take out a mortgage on my house and I use the money to buy the shares in the company, then obviously the risk gets significantly higher. Now, in the case of options, options are derivatives and they do have leverage, so they do have risk associated with it. And I'm going to talk about a call option first. So a call option is a contract essentially between two parties. Okay, and I'll write the key concepts of this out. The contract allows the buyer, or gives the buyer the right to buy shares of a company. So it'll give you the right to buy shares of a company, and this will be done at a set price and before a certain period of time. So there's going to be an expiration date to this contract. Okay, so essentially, these are the key terms of the contract. So in this case, it's a call option, so they have the right to buy. The important thing to realize here, it's not the obligation, it's the right. And this will come up later as well. The set price is referred to as the exercise price. So this is the price at which you will be buying the shares. And the expiration date is exactly as it sounds. It's the expiry. Okay, so when does it, or actually it's the time period to exercise a contract. And this whole thing here is really one contract. And it's going to be a contract, like I said, between two different parties. So one contract is equal to 100 shares of whichever stock. So if these are options on Google, this contract will give you the right to buy 100 shares of Google at a set price before a certain date. Okay, and if you were to say it pictorially, there's going to be two parties to this contract. And one of them is going to be the buyer of the option and one will be the seller. This is also known as the holder of an option, and the seller is the writer of an option. So the buyer is going to pay a premium. Okay, so that's the last term that I didn't mention. A premium is essentially the cost of the contract. Okay, so if they're going to get this right, they have to pay something for it. Otherwise, the seller is not just going to allow you to have this opportunity to buy shares at a set price. And what the seller is giving is the right to buy 100 shares of the company. And it's going to be done at a certain price and at a certain before a certain expiry date. Okay, so that essentially is a call option contract. And why would you buy a call option contract? Essentially, the buyer thinks that the price is going to go up. Okay, so the buyer thinks that the price of the stock increases, so you will buy the contract. And why wouldn't you just buy the stock on its own? This gives you the ability to buy 100 shares. Okay, so if you don't have enough money to buy that lot of shares, you have maybe $1,000, you can buy a contract, and that will give you the ability. So essentially what this is doing is it's providing you with leverage. Okay, so then why wouldn't everyone do this? If you think the stock's going to go up, the reason would be if the price doesn't increase in the expected time, okay, so remember I said these things have an expiry date. Let's suppose the expiry date is 3 months. They're generally shorter than a year. I mean, you can get longer options, but most people trade shorter options. So if it doesn't increase in the expected time, then what ends up happening is the option expires, and you lose your investment, your full investment, which essentially was the premium that you paid for the option. So once that is done, you've lost 100% investment. Whereas if you bought a stock and it just sort of stayed flat for 3 months, you'd sell it, you'd get your money back. In this case, there's a possibility of making a large gain, but there's also a possibility of losing the entire investment at that stage. So that's the risk of a call option. And a put option is exactly the opposite. So a put option, okay, gives the holder the right to sell at a set date. Okay, so you right to sell 100 shares at a set price and before expiration date. And in both cases, it's essentially two parties that are placing a bet on it. You're on the other side of the bet, and whatever one wins, the other one ends up losing.